Kelly Stetner, Director of the Black River Action Team, an all-volunteer group that started in 2000 just cleaning up garbage out of the river. And we've come a long way since then, quite a long way. So we all saw the power of water on July 10th of this year. And some people, many people experienced that in a more personal, up-close way. So if you want to hit slide 1, go for it. Might look a little familiar to some folks. But as we segue from the immediate needs of response to the longer-term recovery projects, now is really a perfect opportunity to reevaluate our relationship with the river and all those tributary streams. So a stream channel will naturally evolve over time. We normally don't see it happen because it changes its bed and banks every second of every day. But when a flood hits, that evolution really happens very fast and very visibly. So we all know, if you want to do the next one, we all know that a river moves water, but it also moves sediment. Tiny flecks of clay, grains of sand, pebbles, gravel, rocks, boulders. If the water has the power to move it, it will. So a river starts really at point A and moves to point B. And 4 factors are going to constantly impact it all along the way, all along its course. There's water volume, the amount of water that's in that channel. The sediment load, which is how much is carried in that volume of water. Sediment size, how big are the particles it's carrying. And then the slope, how steep that channel is working its way across the land. Now, all 4 of those factors are constantly adjusting to one another. And the science of how a river moves across and shapes the land, it's called fluvial geomorphology. Literally moving water, changing the geography, changing the landscape. So it'll erode sediment here, it'll build sediment up over there in a constantly changing dynamic equilibrium. And a truly stable river is not one that stays in place, never changes, it's always the way we remember it. An actually stable river is capable of constantly altering those 4 factors in a perpetual evolution and balance. When flowing water can slow down and spread out, it drops the larger sediment because it loses the energy to carry it. This can be as large as a huge floodplain or a delta, as in the case of Buffalo Brook, or it could be as small as a log across a brook. It'll still bounce against that and drop off some sediment. When the water's moving fast and has enough power, it'll pick up and erode sediment. So a river can't change its point A or its point B, but it actually can effectively change its own slope. By the process of eroding here and depositing there, the water actually develops bends or meanders, which lessen that slope. If you think about the switchbacks on a steep road or a ski slope or a hiking trail, the meanders of a river slow down the water and allow it to adjust and drop out the sediment. So when humans, if you hit the next slide, when humans start changing one factor or another of that equation, we throw off that dynamic equilibrium and the system actually really will respond, sometimes in ways that harm us or the things we care about. Flooding is a natural process of a river's evolution. But whenever flooding happens around villages, homes, businesses, roads, and other human infrastructure, there is loss and damage that is well beyond the physical property. So we need to stop thinking in terms of where a river belongs or putting a stream back in its place. And we really need to look at each stream and brook to see what it did during the flood and figure out why it went where it did and did what it did. And that's the way forward for us, is to plan our collective recovery in a way that helps each stream naturally return to a dynamic equilibrium. So there's often a call to clean out the rivers after a flood. We want it to get back to where it belongs, where we think it needs to be. And in occasional cases, it is important to protect that infrastructure by doing very careful and strategic work on the riverbeds and banks. But in general, unless it's conducted with a good understanding of fluvial geomorphology, most dredging projects will end up making a flooding problem worse in the long run. By deepening the stream bed, we remove the water's access to its floodplain, where it would normally slow down and spread out and even soak in. Straightening the channel, that increases the slope and removes the bends and meanders that the stream uses to slow itself down. And then removing rocks and tree limbs speed up the stream by removing the natural checks that the water would bump against to expend its energy. So what can we do and what should we do? That's always the big question. One thing we really must do is approach our stream banks and river banks with an eye toward that strategic long-term natural protection techniques that are low or no maintenance, so that they've got the resilience to accommodate and recover from floods. So herewith, some good experience to share with us is Ron Rhodes of the Connecticut River Conservancy. And I know that was a little faster than I expected to go, but if you want to take it away. Do you want to save questions for the end, Ron? And if you have questions in chat,
sure.
Save questions to the end, that'll be great. Super, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, give me a second.
All right, give Kathy a second to switch over.
I'm doing some serious multitasking right now.
That's awesome.
Good evening. I am Ron Rhodes, as Kelly said. I live in Pomfret, Vermont, and I've worked for the Connecticut River Conservancy since the day after Irene hit. I was supposed to start that Monday. And I called my boss, my new boss, and said, I won't be there. I'm helping friends dig out mud out of their basement or out of their house. And I spent, like most of us, right? I spent like 3 weeks helping friends and farmers recover from Irene. And here we are again, 12 years later, living through the same thing. So what my job is director of our restoration work. Kathy Erfer, who's running around and doing the audio and visual stuff tonight, is our river steward here in Vermont. So Kathy lives down in Brattleboro, and then we have another staff person. And the three of us and other staff on our crew, we have 20 people in all 4 states, and we work with towns, farmers, foresters, private landowners to do flood mitigation. Sometimes we're repairing damage done by a flood, and sometimes we're making changes to prevent damage or reduce damage in the next flood. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I did want to talk about a few terms first, right? So stormwater, you hear that term and it might mean different things to different people, but basically it is the rain or melting snow that runs off our roofs, our parking lots, etc., into the rivers and streams, i.e. it's the stuff that doesn't soak into the ground. July we had a ton of rain, ground was saturated, that water didn't have any place to go. 100-year flood, the worst term ever created in the history of mankind, in my opinion. It does not mean that a flood of that magnitude is going to happen once in 100 years. It basically is a 1% chance of that magnitude of flood happening. But as we've all seen, and the next slide will show, we have had, count them, 6 100-year floods in the past 100-ish years, right? 1913 and 2023. So just over 100 years, we've had 6 of these catastrophic events here in our part of the Connecticut River watershed here in Vermont. There have been other floods in the Lake Champlain Valley that we didn't get hit with, or maybe in the lower Connecticut River, in Connecticut and Mass that we didn't get hit with. But for us locally, for all of us that live here in the sort of greater Upper Valley, down to Brattleboro, we've had 6 major events that have often done the exact same thing. I live up by Woodstock, right? Route 4. In 1973, I went to the Historical Society and found an article from the Vermont Standard, and it said, the rec center was flooded. Mount Tom Farmers Market was flooded. The Dead River Company was flooded. Everybody on the Route 4 side of the river was flooded out in 73. Marie and I did a presentation in Woodstock, just like this. I put up that article and I covered up the date. Everybody in the room thought it was Irene because it was the exact same thing that happened during Irene. So we're kind of slow learners, but we're trying. I think the silver lining of Irene and this recent flooding was it really opened a lot of eyes to some of the stuff that we can try to do to mitigate flooding, to reduce it, right? If anyone tells you we're going to stop flooding, they're either lying to you or trying to sell you something, right? We are never going to stop flooding. It is not what any of this work and any of these programs are designed to do. It's to reduce the damage, to reduce the flooding, to mitigate. So that's a very important thing. It's kind of like trying to stop erosion, right? Rivers erode. We're never, I mean, unless we look like LA and we have concrete rivers, right? Anybody seen the LA River? Yeah. That might be the one way we could stop erosion. But otherwise, we are going to try to deal with this in this next set of slides. I'll talk about the work that we've been doing, basically since Irene. Oh, I forgot. I got the historic photos. So here's the Black River in 1913. So I got one photo for each of those 6 events, right? Obviously, there's many more. We could have a picture of Ludlow, and there's Ludlow in 1927, right? The 27th flood. There's books written about the 27th flood here in Vermont. So the next one is 38. That's Rochester up in the White River. Flood damage. Another place where the flooding in Irene was like exactly the same. The photos, you could do a side-by-side of the photos, and the damage is almost identical. There's the 73, so that's right on the Bridgewater Woodstock town line, so that's a Route 4. That's something that I found in the Historical Society, again, repeated in Irene. And then this next one's my favorite picture. It's in a weird sort of way. So that's the Connecticut River. This is a few days after Irene. This is the Long Island Sound where the river dumps out. That's Vermont right there. All that sediment went all the way downstream to the Long Island Sound. And that's, just to me, that's an amazing photo, right? So all of our trees, all of our tanks, we pulled tanks out of the Connecticut River and tributaries since then. It's just, 12 years later, I just stopped in Plymouth we're doing a floodplain restoration project in Plymouth, and we just started today. Ben was moving into the site, and that's an Irene fix 12 years later. We're just now getting to the point where we're able to repair that area. It's not really the damage that was done during Irene, it's the damage that was done to fix the road, right? So we have to fix the roads. Everybody needs to be able to get in and get out, but the way we were fixing those roads was not ideal during Irene. The state has made a lot of changes since then, and so at least some of the stuff that I've seen this time around was better, right? A lot of training's been done for town road crews and private contractors, and again, sort of that silver lining of Irene is we learned from our mistakes, but we're still correcting some of them. All right, Kathy, I didn't put any pictures of the most recent flooding. I didn't think we all needed to be reminded of all that. It's still fresh in our minds, right? So it's kind of cut off there. Floodplain function loss on the last 200 plus years. So this is the area I was just talking about in Plymouth. So you can, when they fixed 100A, which is down here on the left, and they put the riprap in here to protect the road, they also, unfortunately, bermed the far side of the river. So this used to be the floodplain, and there was a nice wetland downstream. And now the river had nowhere to go because they created a berm. So what we are doing is taking that berm out and reestablishing the floodplain and allowing the next flood to go up into there, because the house is here and the road is here. There's nothing over there that's, we need to, quote, protect. And so the river will have some place to spread out, slow down. Yes, it will still flood, but it won't do the big damage, right? One of my best friends lives on the White River, organic farmer, and in Irene, his whole farm got flooded. He lost, $35,000 worth of corn and sweet potatoes and everything else. But the real big damage to his property was 2 huge bites that were taken out of his riverbank, and he lost a bunch of land. Now ultimately, you'll see some photos of the work that was done to repair that and to fix that and to reestablish that farm, which is now being used again. So anyways, we've done, you know, all of these things to our rivers. We've dammed them, we've channelized them, we've dredged them, and over the years we've learned that that is not the best way to manage our rivers, right? Obviously we have to do some rip-wrapping and, you know, some structural work to protect roads and protect homes. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not just letting the rivers go wherever they want all the time, right? So there's a happy medium, I think. So next one, Kathy. So not as focused on all of the dams in the watershed, although that is an amazing, it's not really a picture, but amazing overview of the dams. But you know, we have kind of take these out of play. These are the active dams that are actually providing electricity or flood control, right? Those are all good. They're doing something for us. It's this 3,000 dams that are no longer being used. We just are finishing up a dam removal down in Wilmington. I'll show you pictures of that later. And guess what? That dam caused this major flooding in Irene. Now that dam's gone. The next time they're going to have more flood capacity there. And then this last one, the 44,000 culverts, road and stream crossing. Mostly those are culverts. There's some bridges, undersized bridges. But you'll see some culvert pictures. I know in my town, after Irene, we were a little bit short-sighted and worried about the budget, and a 4-foot culvert blew out, and we put a 4-foot culvert back in because that's what was cheap, it's what we could afford. And then it blew out in the next big storm, and it cost us $260,000 instead of $60,000. So we're sometimes looking too much at the existing budget and not the long-term budget. You know, I've got a slide regarding that later too. All right, so again, our work is restoration, right? A town comes to us and says, we got this culvert, or a farmer comes to us and said, I've got this erosion problem. We're always working with willing landowners. No one can force a landowner to do something on the property they don't want to do, right? So all of this is voluntary work. Our role, Kathy and I and our other staff, we write grants all winter long to be able to do the work in the field season. So basically May to October, right? We're spending most of my time out in the field doing these type of projects. So this was the Bradford Golf Course up here. That was root wad, bank stabilization, peeling the bank back, planting buffers. So that first one, riparian areas and floodplains. They got damage in Irene. The bridge, right as Route 5 in Bradford. The bridge is a constriction, fire hose effect, makes the river run really fast there, and then it dumped out all of the sediment and rock right across from the golf course and forced the river over to the golf course. Basically was taking away their bank, and you can't really tell that, but right behind that is one of the holes on the golf course. So we were able to get grants to fix that, and it has held up ever since. Even this July it held up. So we've got a nice buffer of trees there now, and we've got a stable bank for it. That was a private dam removal. Again, fully funded. We don't ask the town or the landowners to open up their checkbook and spend a bunch of money on these projects. We feel like that's our job. We've got the staff to go out and write the grants. We've got members and donors who like to help support this type of work. So we've luckily, knock on wood, we've been able to do that. And right now, with all the, what do they call it, Bill and ARPA and all these federal acronyms, right? There's a lot of federal money in the system over the next 5 years for these type of projects. So I've been telling people of late, if you're considering something like this, if you're considering a dam removal, like now might be the time because there's federal money out there to help get it done. All right, let's move on. I'll just go through part of these. Oh yeah, okay. So riparian, it's hard to tell in this picture. I had a better one. So these are trees and shrubs back here. This was a farm field that had an eroding bank. There's a bridge right downstream, so again, this undersized bridge, a constriction point, and so the river gets backed up. So you can sort of tell this is all wood and root wads. So you take trees, you want the root balls attached to them, you put those root balls right up against the edge of the water, and you bury the tree trunks back into the bank. You excavate it out, you put them in, and you fill it back up. And then these are vertical tree trunks. So you really create a nice edge of that stream, and it's not rock, I call rock hard armoring, rip-rap. And this I call soft armoring, right? The design is, it's just wood. It will deteriorate over 20 years. But the riparian buffer will have a chance to grow up then. So the riprap, the rock, is really, it might solve your problem, but it's going to create a problem for your neighbor upstream or downstream or across the stream. Because that hard armoring, that high water, hits that and it just bounces. It doesn't dissipate the energy. So the wood is a much softer, gentler way to do it, and it helps dissipate the energy, but give you some stabilization in time for that buffer to grow up. Because really what we want is those tree roots to grow down into the soil, right? So if we plant a tree here, and tree root 6 feet long grows down in there and helps hold that bank in place. And there's not just one tree or one row of trees. It's got to be a bunch of small willows, alders, right, shrubs, and then also the oaks and the maples and the trees that go with it. So usually we're planting the shrubs closer to the water and the bigger trees further back. Depends on the site, but that's a general rule of thumb. So riparian buffers. So the stabilizing the banks with the wood, so bench, and they call it biostabilizing because you're planting. So this was actually in New Hampshire, Amanuensis Conservation Trust. You can see in the top left, that's the bank that's being undercut. And they don't use that field for anything. You could let it continue to erode, but all of that erosion is happening because there's no roots in the ground. And all that soil that's going into that's the Amanuensis River, all the soil that's going in there has got nitrogen in it. And then all that nitrogen is going down into Connecticut and the Long Island Sound. And we've all heard about Lake Champlain and their phosphorus problems, right? Well, the same thing happens in the Long Island Sound with nitrogen. So you have too much algae, not enough oxygen, fish and other aquatic organisms start dying. So we're doing this not only for the stabilization purposes, but also for the nitrogen loading reduction. So we got, again, grants to do this work. We peeled, that bank was about 8 feet high. As you can see here, we peeled it back. Those are steps, I don't know if you can kind of tell. Engineering design, permitted, contractor comes in, and you create this new bench and actually have access for the water to come up into that area. So that you can see all the ice after the first year we did it. All of that high water was up on that bench and that ice was left there. And luckily, the willows and the dogwoods that we plant on that area, they don't care. They just send up new shoots. You can come in and chop them off, or the beaver can chew on them, and they just send out new shoots. You wouldn't want to put an oak tree right on that edge, right? But shrubs like willows and dogwoods and speckled alders do great. That's where they naturally grow. So we have the root wads in there to help provide some buffer from the high water. But really, this is that floodplain access. We do a lot of this work with farmers who have erosion problems. They're losing, in New Hampshire, they lose about 2 feet every year just from spring runoff of their farm. And so we say, hey, we could come in and do this project, plant a 35-foot buffer. You do the math and you go, okay, I can either not do anything and lose 2-3 feet a year, or I can lose 35 feet all at once and it'd be done with it. So we've had a lot of success over the last several years doing this project, and there's federal money to help do it. USDA has money out there and programs out there. My favorite, dams and the culverts. So this dam, you can't see it in the picture, but that dam was actually attached to an apartment building where people actually live. I'm sorry, I wouldn't live in that place. Every spring you have to go through that filling up. There was like 2 little holes for the water to go through. And so we actually had to do some pouring cement in the basement of the building to stabilize it before we took the dam out. And then these undersized culverts, right? This one is perched, which is not good for fish and other aquatic organism passage, but really for flooding, we're talking about undersized. They're not wide enough to handle the flows. So we're doing a lot of that work, which I think is in the next few. Yep. There's maybe my favorite dam removal. The one we're finishing now is my 21st since 2014. So we are plugging along. We're doing 2 or 3 old dam removals a year. That one was in East Burke in 2016. So it was about 10-foot high concrete dam. There used to be a mill there, 100 and some years ago, 180 years ago. Great story. The wood that came out of East Burke in World War II was made into toilet seats and shipped all over the world. So a little bit of history that we get to capture in these projects. So there's the removal process. You can see we got 3 yellow machines, yellow excavators in the brook or in the river there. The dam's already gone, and then that's what it looks like now. There's still a stair step. It's not a waterfall, but it's a stair step waterfall. And instead of being full, that 10-foot dam was full of 9 feet of sediment, and no one swam there because you'd step in and go up to your knee. And when we did this project, the 8th grade students came down from East Burke Academy or East Burke School, and the first question they asked was, "Are we going to be able to swim there after the dam is gone?" Because they wouldn't swim there with with that muck. And we said, "Yeah, it's going to be great." And people paddle there in the spring. It's so much better from a recreational standpoint, but for flooding, which is why we're here tonight, by removing that dam. So this is all businesses here in East Burke. And then just downstream below the bridge are houses. Just by removing that dam and that trapped sediment, we lowered the flood elevation level by 4 feet. So, I don't know, 4 feet's about here, right? There is that much more storage capacity in July when we just had this big storm. Now, I'm not going to tell you that because we removed that dam, if that dam had still been there, they would have all flooded. But they did in the past, right? And they didn't this summer. Again, I can't tell you for sure, right? But that 4 foot of extra storage all up and down that riverbank. So we went all the way back and behind. So I forget what the distance was, but there's a lot of storage capacity in that system that wasn't there before. Did you have a question?
Yeah, how do beaver dams compare with this?
Beaver dams?
Yeah.
Another slide in a little bit. Yep, good question. All right, there's the culverts. So this is the place in Wilmington. So that is the 4 foot culvert with all that concrete around it that was on Beaver Brook in Wilmington. There it is. It's kind of a fuzzy picture, but there it is in Irene. Blown out, road blown out. Everybody that lives up that Hall Road cut off for I forget how many days. Someone told me. They couldn't get in or out. That's the only way in and out, right? Now, 4 foot culvert, 40 foot wide bridge. We just put in 2 weeks ago. So we have 10 times the capacity, right? You could put 10 of those 4 foot culverts in there. The culvert couldn't pass a 100-year flood. That can pass a 500-year flood. Didn't cost the town a dime. All of it is paid for with grants and our donors and members. The town kicked in some truck usage and whatnot, but they didn't have to pay anything for that new bridge. So much better flood capacity, flood resiliency for the town of Wilmington and those people that live there. All right, Kathy, let's keep going. In-stream structures, beaver dams, analog beaver dams. So we are actually now, and it's fairly recent, doing wood additions, beaver dams, and in some cases wetland restoration work where we are adding material back into very small streams. Nothing like the Black River because it will get blown out in the next high water. But in these really small headwater streams that are only a few feet wide, we are cutting trees down out of the forest, dragging them into the stream because as Kelly mentioned that we were talking earlier about check dams, right? It slows the water down. It makes the water spread out into this forested area where nothing's at risk, right? No homes, no bridges, no culverts. And we're able to trap some of that sediment in these upstream areas with these wood additions or the beaver dams. I don't have a picture of the beaver dams, but they're actually now driving wood into these small streams, so like stakes across, right? Big stakes, not little stakes. And then you've seen the, like, people make a fence out of wood, they weave the, you know, so essentially that's what we're doing now, people are doing now in these small streams. You pile drive the stakes down in, the big stakes, and then you create a beaver dam, a man-made beaver dam, you know, in the streams to create a place where the water will slow down, sediment will drop out, and in some cases they're actually creating new wetlands in that process. So it's what Kelly was talking about earlier. Does that answer the beaver dam question? Yeah. Sometimes beaver dams are in the wrong place, right? And they're a problem, and you can get a permit from the state to get rid of the beaver, or they have, what do they call them, Marie? Beaver deceivers. Beaver deceivers, where you can actually put like a corrugated pipe into the, and it lets the water run out, but the beaver doesn't come back every day and rebuild the dam because they think it's still there.
So I guess I don't understand, that dams tend to be bad because the silt piles up behind them. But the beaver dams, why is the silt not piling up behind them?
Yep, good question.
And, yeah.
One thing is location, right? We're a dam in the middle of the Black River, big river, all the sediments being trapped there, not going downstream. Most of these beaver dam analogs that people are creating are way up in the headwaters where there's no infrastructure. So if it floods, right, just this forest is getting flooded, creating a vernal pool or whatnot. So that location is part of it. But also all of this wood is permeable, right? It does back up the water and slow it down, but you still had nooks and crannies, and the fish can still swim through and the salamanders can crawl through. Concrete dam, you don't get any of that. So I would say those are the two, in my mind. Marie might have something else to add to that, but in my mind, those are the location and the permeability of the material.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, there's, when you get to a beaver dam area, it does collect sediment. That's why you end up with places called Beaver Meadow. Over centuries, so much sediment is built up that it becomes just flat field. And it's the habitat benefit. Beaver dams, if there's a massive flood, they will just blow out.
Good, yeah, that's the other point, good.
And
The third point is that the beaver dams could go bye-bye in the next flood, right?
and
It happens all
they're
the time.
cyclical. They last for about 10 or 12 years, and then the beavers eat themselves out of food, and then they move on somewhere else. So it creates different pockets of habitat over time that really increase wetland habitat and the other wildlife that goes with that.
Right. Those old concrete dams have been in our systems for hundreds of years. I mean, we've removed some that were 150 or 60 years old, right? And a woman that used to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, she retired now, unfortunately, but one of our great partners, she talked about these old dams and culverts also as like blocked arteries in our veins, right? Like rivers are our veins, and the blockage that gives us a heart attack, like that's these old dams, and removing them makes the river system healthier. I thought that was a great analogy.
It was hard to understand how lowering the dam that looked like it might have been 4 or 5 feet high would increase the floodplain, because
Flood elevation
reducing the location of the floodplain, maybe, as to making it larger, right?
But you're increasing the flood elevation level, so the storage capacity, because the sediment behind those dams
Right.
fills up the whole channel, and even in some cases comes out beyond,
So
right?
it needed to get flushed out or relocated, but, so completely removing it would solve that problem.
Yep.
I see what you-
And occasionally we have done partial removal. You know, there's a lot of permitting and, you know, processes you have to go through to do any of these projects. But engineering design is one of the first things. And sometimes we do what's called an alternatives analysis. Should we do full removal, partial removal? Should we put in a fish ladder if that's the main goal, right? So you pay for that initial study before you go and spend a ton of money.
So a big reason to remove it also is to have fish and wildlife be able to go upstream.
Yep.
Is that it?
Yep, a lot of the money we get is for fish passage. And of course here in Vermont is brook trout, right? And so that by removing that dam, like for that East Brook Dam, we opened 90 miles of stream. So if you were a brook trout down in Linden or Lindenville, you couldn't go all the way up, right? You could get up to East Brook and that was it. Now they can go up into the North Branch, they can go up into the tributaries, and they can get up on the Burke Mountain. So we opened 90 miles of stream. They can go spawn, they can get out of the hot summer down in the main street, in the main river. Brook trout are very cold water
So I guess
oriented.
it would depend on the flow of the stream. Now, I'm thinking in Charlestown, New Hampshire, you have a conservation commission in charge of trails and streams. We used to have surface water for our reservoirs, and it was along Clay Brook that ran maybe, 8 miles, 5 miles. They breached most of the lower dams, but the upper dam near the headwaters is still remaining. And it's a very pretty area. And I'm thinking if we breach this dam, and it isn't large, it isn't 5 feet high, it holds back a nice amount of water, and there's a pond, there's fishing in it, there's different, a lot of wildlife in that area, it's conserved property. And I'm going, every dam isn't necessarily need to be breached. I guess safety is one item, right?
The largest dam owner in the state of Vermont is the state of Vermont, right? All of those reservoirs that we go to on vacation or that we camp on, the state parks that are on, or we go fishing on, right? 90% of them or 99% of them have a dam, and they've created recreational access for all of us. No one's removing those, right? These are all the old mill dams, or they built it in the 20s to create a swimming pool or swimming hole in their property. Someone new comes along, buys the property, and they go, what do you mean I owe the state money for this dam inspection, and now I got liability issues, and private dam owners are really eager to get out from under their dams.
That's a big
it's
regulatory issue in New Hampshire, because nobody knows who regulates dams. I questioned it because
well, state of New Hampshire sends a dam owner.
DES is
projects we've done in New Hampshire is because the dam owner got a letter from the state saying your dam's in disrepair. You either have to fix it or remove it. And fixing it is an expensive venture, right? Generally speaking, I can't say this is all the time, but in the cases that I know of, the cost to repair a dam is twice as much as we will spend to remove it. And there's grant funding to pay for the removal, and there is no grant funding to help you repair the dam. So when it comes to private ownership, most private owners, even some of the small hydro owners, because they're struggling to make money, folks are looking for help. And so if folks are looking for help, groups like Pratt and CRC and Trout Unlimited can go out and get those grant funds to help you make it happen. I think we have one more slide, Kathy. All right, so this is back to the funding. I found this on floodresiliency.net. Why invest in flood resiliency? So for every dollar we invest in these type of projects, or stormwater project, or rain garden projects, we're saving $5 in future losses. That kind of gets back to my story about my town, right? We spent $60K for an undersized culvert because that's what we had in there before, and it cost us $260K to repair the damage when the flood came. So it's what's penny wise, pound, what's the saying? Whatever that saying is, it makes sense for us to invest some money now because we're going to save money in the long run. And I think now that we have this boon of federal money right now, which is only going to be here for 5 years, who knows if that'll ever get funded at that level again. It's kind of like strike while the iron's hot. So I think that was my last. Yep, and we can save other Q&A till the end, right?
Sure.
Okay. Unless someone's got a burning question. All right, great, thank you.
If
did a really good job of memorizing all of his comments, so I'm jealous. So yeah, straightening the streams and the riverbanks more naturally is strengthening, not straightening. Strengthening is really just one big part of the stormwater puzzle. And while there's value in upsizing those bridges and culverts, there's even more value, as Ron put it, in reducing the amount of rainfall and snowmelt that hits those streams in the first place. So while we can't control the precipitation, what we do once it reaches the land is the important part, because once what we do on the land affects how much the streams are impacted. Oh, you're back to that already, good job. So taking a fresh look at how water is moving from the land's surface into our streams is essential. Obviously, Ron covered a lot of that, and you don't need to even hear about what runs off in runoff, because you've already heard all about runoff. But treating runoff in some very interesting ways is something that Mike with EJ Prescott is very good at. I've been in touch with these guys for many years about their stormwater products, their procedures, their methods. You guys work on everything from residential properties, municipal, you even do stuff at airports. Just right on top of cutting edge how to deal with stormwater when we're not up in those forested headwaters, when we're down in the towns, when we're at facilities and we're dealing with infrastructure. There are some really interesting, clever, and creative ways that we can deal with stormwater as well. So I'd like to bring up Mike and let Mike chat a little bit. And this is my closing slide, so you can throw this back up when Mike's all done. I don't think, or you can leave this up. I think
Leave it up.
Yeah, you don't even have a slideshow. You're that
Yeah,
awesome.
so I've got tons of presentations, and the worst part about me giving a presentation is I constantly forget to click the slide, and I just keep talking. So, yes, all right, great. So I'm gonna sneak in and out of the frame here, just because I'm gonna grab some stuff to show and different things like that. But just to talk about myself for a minute, because that's my favorite subject. I work for EJ Prescott. I'm the Eastern Erosion Control and Stormwater Specialist. I basically cover New England, run around looking at all kinds of great sites and helping out with solutions and doing a lot of fun things on the erosion control side of things, whether it's a small little slope or it's a 200-foot bluff, sand bluff, and trying to figure a way to vegetate it, right? So I get to do some really kind of neat, fun things. But as well as you guys know from recent rain events and Irene, sediment is one of the #1 pollutants for our water bodies, right? For lakes, streams, rivers, it is the #1. All right. There's also other contaminants in there as well, and that we like to address and talk about. But in my eyes, one of the best ways to help eliminate that sediment from coming and coming into our water bodies is utilizing vegetation. Sustainable vegetation is the one of the best ways to actually prevent erosion control, okay? But it's sustainable vegetation. It's not just getting something to germinate now and then a year or two down the road it dies off. So we want to make sure, and we want to educate people on that you have to look at that soil structure. You can't just try and throw out grass seed and throw some straw in there and let it, come in, because it needs to come in. So if you go to your doctor and you have a tummy ache, they're not going to automatically schedule you for surgery. They're going to run some tests, and that's one of the things that we like to promote, is having people get in soil tests so you understand what's going on in that soil structure, so you can actually put the right amendments in place. And you don't need to use a lot of chemical fertilizers and different things like that. There's organic fertilizers, there's different methods out there that you can actually help revitalize the organic matter in your soil. There's ways to address the pH. Vermont is kind of unique because some areas have high pH, some areas have low pH. So there's things that are out there that you can address that. So when you get into stormwater and talking stormwater management, we're trying to slow the water down as much as possible, right? We want to slow it down and soak it in. So when you have a rain event, which you guys fully aware of different rain events, but a 1-inch rain event over an acre is over 27,000 gallons of water, okay? And the more we have these developments, and the more we're seal coating our cities and our towns with all this impervious surface, whether it's asphalt, concrete, rooftops, the more flooding you're gonna have. It's what's gonna happen. I mean, we're seeing more flooding now than we did back in the 50s and 60s. It's because we have more population, we have more development, and that's what's happening. But there's things that we can do to help protect that and stop, or not stop it, but slow that down, that process down. Not only that, is to think about this. I mean, everybody knows that the world's made up of 70% water, right? But only 3% of it is actually fresh water out of that 70%. 0.007% of that is actually accessible drinking water. It's very little, right? The average US household pull up over 34 billion gallons of water a day through our aquifers. Okay? We are shipping water off-site as quick as possible. We need to get it back into the ground, is what we need to do. And there's a lot of cause effect, right? If we can get it back into the ground, we can actually, you end up getting, and there's a great, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there's great videos online showing dry dirt with a cup of water going into it and vegetated areas. You're getting more absorption in there when you get things vegetated. You can get things back in the ground. So doing grass parking areas, permeable parking areas, there's different types. There's aggregate systems out there. There's interlocking concrete paver systems. I have, personally, this is personal, I don't know if people are gonna see this in this picture here or not. This is my house, all right? We would have a pond in our driveway every time it rained. And then in the wintertime, we would have 2 inches of ice in our driveway. And in a very weak moment, I agreed to build an in-law apartment with my wife's parents. And there's no way I could have them walking across 2 inches of ice. So I looked at different options of what are out there, what can we do, you know? Do I repave it, put drainage in and all this stuff? And I ended up saying, well, I talk about this stuff all the time, I should probably just do it, right? It looks great, but you know what? We don't have any ice anymore. We don't have any ponding. These interlocking permeable pavers, they have specific ASTM standards for them, right? They have a ASTM standard on joint size, there's aspect ratio, there's all kinds of technical things. But the bottom line with it is when you get into a permeable interlocking concrete paver, you have a 1/2-inch joint in there. You can do 500 inches per hour of rain. Okay? Nobody's designing for 500 inches per hour. It's just not possible. But that's what it can handle. Just so everybody's clear, there is no stormwater management treatment system that doesn't take maintenance. There's some sort of maintenance involved. You have to maintain it. And most of the time that something's failing and I go out to check, it's because they didn't maintain it.
You were talking when we first pulled up, you were talking about like a vegetated retaining wall type of thing?
Yeah, so there's a system out there that is actually, it's really neat. It's been around for a long time. It's a Canadian company out in the Vancouver area. They actually have a bag system that you infill with a sand and media mix, and it is basically an MSC retaining wall, just like you would do a block retaining wall and you'd have geogrids going back in. This is a bag system that you vegetate. They highly recommend that you hydroseed it with an erosion mulch, but you can actually put plugs in it. And and you can go up to, I think it's, they've got walls out there that are 60-something feet high with buildings on top of them. It's got a 120-year design life and a 70-year warranty with it. It is cool.
How high?
You can go up to 60 feet with it. And so any type of retaining wall system, the retaining wall face of it really isn't your structural side of it. It's the geogrid behind it. The geogrid is what's holding everything in place, keeping any type of lateral movement from going, sliding. The rest of it's just facing. So with this, you've got this bag system in there that goes up, and once it's vegetated, you don't see it. It's not there. And they say it's a 120-year design life. They actually, through the testing data, they got 240 years. And then they're like, well, we're going to put it on documentation 120. We just cut it in half. But it's pretty impressive. And I'm very excited about it because one of the things that they're using it for is shoreline stabilization, right? So what they're doing in shoreline, in fact, up in New Brunswick, they've got one lake that has like 16 of these going around there because they're actually right down in the water. Those bags in the water, they're actually infilling with a stone mix, and then once they get above the high water, they're vegetating it. And it's taking wave action, it's taking ice, and it's pretty impressive.
We got a lake about 6 miles from here. The bank's almost vertical, the road's on top and collapsing into the lake.
Yeah, we can do it. It's pretty impressive. It's a fantastic system. And we're doing a big federal project right now in New Hampshire down in Dover. That was a contaminated site along the river. And actually, in all reality, it looks like a giant science project because we're doing, bioengineering on the shoreline. We've got coral logs going everywhere. But we're also doing these. They're putting in big boulders in there, and then they're going to set this on top and in one area, and then another area. This is going to be down by the water and going up. So it's pretty cool. And so that's I look at stuff like that all the time. I'd be more than happy to make recommendations.
We'll talk.
All right. All right. Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. I think I was just gonna wrap up by saying thank you guys all for coming. Thank you guys for presenting. And that recovery really is a partnership, and the more we can think outside the box and think up the hill, the more impact we can have lower down where we see it every day, down in our towns and in our backyards and on our lake shores. So it's a partnership, and get in touch with me if you would like any information about anybody who spoke tonight. And if you've got project ideas, or hey, maybe you should come look at my backyard, give me a call, shoot me an email, and we'll see if we can't get in touch.
Kelly, can you talk about how, let's say the Black River, right, the whole watershed is interconnected, and how we're here in Ludlow, but what's happening upstream and downstream matters to Ludlow?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I live and work in Springfield, and while I can say that we are extremely grateful for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flood control dam in Wethersfield, North Springfield, Wethersfield area, the color of the Black River is the same color as the lakes on Route 100 because it's all the Black River. We're seeing the color and lack of clarity in the lakes and in the river itself for the most part. The bulk of that's coming from fine clay sediment that's washing down in from places like Muddy Brook up in Plymouth. And it's suspended clay, and we're just gonna see that for a while. It really is all interconnected, as Ron said, as we think about the lakes and we think about this stream in my backyard, that lake that my boathouse is on. The lakes in Ludlow are all down Route 100, that's all Black River. They're all big, deep, wide sections of the river. And what happens upstream in Muddy Brook, we'll see it down in Springfield, and even in the Connecticut River. because that's where the Black River ends up. So what we do down in Springfield doesn't really impact what happens upstream in Ludlow. But if we can all be working on ways to help that stormwater slow down, spread out, whether it's right in downtown Springfield and we're managing stormwater, or renovating our sidewalks, similar concepts can be happening up in these headwater streams, up in the top of Jewel Brook and the top of Okemo Brook, Buffalo Brook, all these little brooks. If we can get further up in there and be looking at ways to put in those check dams, put in the I don't know about beaver dam analogs. I want to talk about that more, but just things that we can do on a private level. If each individual homeowner and lakeshore owner is doing something small to maybe not mow right to the edge, maybe plant some dogwoods and willows along the edge, let that stream meander and don't build a utility shed right next to it, or consider some of those porous paving options if you're looking to redo your driveway.
Quick question.
It can all have a good impact. Yes.
Just driving up 100. Amherst looks muddier than the rest of the lakes, and that's the farthest up.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. The other lakes seem to be clearing faster. Any thought?
I'll defer to Marie on that one.
Well, is it?
So
Am I right, or is it?
Most likely,
Okay.
yeah, because Amherst is the most upstream, so it's the sediment trap for the rest of the lake system. Everything that's coming in from Moneybrook and the top of the watershed hits Amherst first, settles out, and then the river keeps moving through Echo, Rescue, Pauline, and so Pauline's going to be way cleaner than Amherst.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. I was I'm just thinking it flows downstream that Pauline would be the muddiest.
Yeah,
but,
no, because it's all settling out as
Yeah,
it goes
okay.
through the system.
So I was just gonna say I have one comment and one, well, I guess they're both comments. First of all, if you know the story of Susanna Johnson, who was captured by the Indians and taken and so forth, I just had reason to reread her journal, and she refers to Black River Pond because the river was black. So it's not like this is a new occurrence, because that was around the time of the French and Indian Wars. So it was still known by that same name, and it's what we would call Ludlow today. But the other thing is that I'm watching all kinds of homeowners wanting to do mitigation, businesses doing mitigation, and it does have an impact on your neighbors. And there's no cohesive way that we are all working together. It was something that you and Carol and I emailed about, that we need to all be working together in a cohesive fashion, because I saw one place that was really destroyed during Irene. They were down for a day versus 2 months. But their neighbor, who has never flooded through 1927, and I can prove that, they had horrible flooding. The water's gonna go somewhere. If you keep it out of your building, it's still gonna go someplace else. And we're not doing this as cohesive communities. We've talked about it. What can we form? And maybe that's through GRAT. What can we form to really talk about how we work together? We've talked about this, Jason. How do we work together?
Yeah, it's a matter of making sure that the information is out there, and that's why this is being recorded. It's on Zoom. I want to get this out in as many venues as possible, that there are ways that the focus is slow it down, spread it out, and soak it in. And here are some resources how we can do that. Some of them won't cost you a darn thing. Some of them we'd appreciate some elbow grease. There are ways to partner, and we just all have to be on the same page and have the same goals in mind, and understand
So
that the ways to get there are.
So, maybe what we want to do with our 5th and 6th graders, instead of literally picking up trash, is there a place where they can go and they can pull the limbs into these small tributaries that feed the Black River? I mean, that's another option for those kiddos.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet.
I was gonna say probably not, but
But we could, if we talked about it and did it on a weekend, maybe we could do a riverbug adventure and look at the stream macroinvertebrates and understand why Right now, Okemo Brook has nothing in it. There's nothing in there at all that's alive. No critters, no bugs, no nothing. Versus, let's go look at, Trailside Brook. Or I was just in Branch Brook, and there's all kinds of critters moving around in there. There's a lot of wood in there. There's a lot of just natural, they haven't gone in and re-landscaped anything. There's been no dredging going on in there. Lots of critters in that brook. So that's a possibility too, is to learn more about what's living in the stream and how what we do affects that. Because
Kelly, I think that's an important point we forget about, right? Let's take brook trout, for example. They have survived in Vermont for eons through all those floods I talked about and 10,000 other ones, right? All those critters have survived through floods for generations. It's when we get in and start mucking around that things get worse.
Yep.
Like Mother Nature's got it pretty well figured out.
Yeah. A lot of them are built to survive it too. Stoneflies do one thing they have one sort of tactic to deal with heavy water and tumbling rocks, and there's other critters that are designed to kind of lay low on the bottom. Others drift along with the stream, and just the physical adaptations are pretty incredible too. But that might be more fun too. Yes.
So, is there any place to go to find out who? It seems like the towns are all putting their big machinery in the, Ludlow's got its big machinery in the rivers, and Chester has its big machinery in the rivers, and all the roads that dumped into the streams, the driveways have all been put back with materials that are going to dump into the streams in the next.
Which could be next week with Lee.
Which could be next week.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any place to go in the state to say, would you come look at my neighborhood because we had flooding and I'm trying to put together my yard in a way that's going to help instead of hurt? Or for the select board or the road crew to, who do I call? Who's there? It's nice to be in a room like this and have everybody care about it. But who do we call to come look? Yes.
That'd be me.
All right.
Or I would say
Or Kelly, or Ron, or Kathy.
Yeah. Any one of us for sure. And if I don't know myself what to tell you, I know who would know to tell you. So I can certainly connect you up to resources as well. And I'm going to be redesigning my website fairly soon, as soon as I catch my breath, to have a resources page of if this is the sort of question you're looking to, got questions about redesigning your backyard because of stream erosion, or what to do, where to go for information on driveway options, or this, that, or the other thing, just try to funnel you to some resources where you can get those questions answered.
And there's a state website, Flood Ready Vermont, so I have that right? Yep. So that's another good general resource. It may not answer all your questions. Flood Ready Vermont.
Spelled out .com or?
Yeah, I think so.
.gov makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Okay.
So that's another general resource.
And are towns being encouraged by the state to educate themselves about these kinds of things?
I'll just introduce myself.
Yes.
I know who you are.
I'm Marie Levette Caduto. I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation and partner with all these guys on this kind of work. I'm the watershed planner for this region. I live in Reading. And yes, the state is, since Irene, the state has been training. It trained all the state road crews and then all the municipal road crews on how to go about managing and better addressing flood issues like this, and how to work with rivers and streams and roads and make them all work better. Those workshops have been having for 12 years now, and they're still going on. And the local roads crews, the local road program also has a lot of training for road issues and select boards. We also do We also have municipal outreach. Jason is with the Regional Planning Commission, and they do a lot of that work with municipalities, and a lot of education if you want to talk about those kind of things. But there's a lot of resources, and as far as, you were just asking who do you go to, we all work together, and we all partner, so we all know who covers what and who to go to. So whoever you happen to reach first, will be able to point you in the right direction.
And you're available to just people asking questions.
Definitely. It might not be in 10 minutes, but.
Yeah, right.
One of the problems is when this hit, and I dealt with Irene and I've been on the front lines with this as well, is that it's, you grab Sally, I'll grab Jane, we'll have a play in the barn mentality of, get out this, mold and all of that. But this time, it really went beyond that in those first weeks or two, and suddenly driveways are being just regular. Everybody has a tractor in Vermont, knows how to use it, is kind of the joke. And there's nobody stepping in and saying, slow it down, just like we want to slow down the river. Let's think this through. Does it make the best sense? So when you hear about buyout options, your town managers are going to no, because that means off the tax rolls, housing issues. Best thing for the river could prevent flooding potentially. And Jason and I were just talking about some stuff that's happening. We get, if God forbid, we get the full force of Lee, but if we do, that stuff's going to go down. There's just no two ways about it. What should not be built in Vermont are trailer parks. Really.
Or at least not next to the river.
Right,
Not
exactly.
And I know that conversation is happening at the state level as well. State planners are looking at relocating such facilities as trailer parks away from floodplains and adjacent to the rivers.
But select boards have to be encouraged to do that for the town.
I'd like to address your question, how you get involved and who do you see. I have your same feeling, and I joined or attended regularly our city town Conservation Commission meetings, and it's really grassroots. And I found that the highway department has training sessions for like what you're offering that I've attended, and construction people that have to work with soil have to get recertified for so many hours a year. I attended some of those. Often they were free. I'm just getting a better understanding on how I can do my part on my property. And my feeling is everybody should catch the rain where it falls. If it's running off your roof, use it in a rain barrel or your garden. Have a rain garden to soak it up before it goes down the storm drain and in the street. Everything you can do to get water in the ground before it flows off is cooling your environment, greening the environment, capturing the nitrogens, and it's and then when you get that concept, it's sort of like you can kind of embrace it and spread the word, and it's all regulated. Michael's talking about a lot of urban stuff. They're building these huge cisterns to capture water that's on parking lots of big auto dealerships, for instance, or strip malls, because legally they can't sheet that water off of their property. They have to get it soaked into the ground. We all need to think about that, and we all ought to make sure that our communities are seeing that that's getting done and development is happening. So I think a conservation commission is a great grassroots part, and you got a lot of links on your website to different agencies, people that soak up the rain. That's we have a group in New Hampshire that does that. One person, but she spreads herself thin. But that's a nationwide, and that is again, soak up the rain where it falls, keep it from washing into streams and lakes and get it to groundwater.
Absolutely.
A question about this last storm and taking down the dams and things like that. And you mentioned hey, I can show you. Here's the picture in 1973 of the same flooding. But what I noticed is tons and tons of trees. It's especially as you go out towards Rutland, and I don't know the names of all the rivers so well, but you go out, tons of trees. And wasn't that the cause of some of the flooding this time, or not, like getting caught in bridges or getting caught in stuff we did to put it in the way for these trees? Was that a big issue?
Yeah, so undersized culverts and undersized bridges, right? The best example I can give you is the U.S. Forest Service up in the Green Mountains. Prior to Irene, so back in like 2010, they went around and upsized most, but not all, of their culverts on their federal land. The ones that got upsized survived Irene, and the roads didn't get blown out. The smaller ones got plugged up by trees and rocks and debris, and those roads got blown out. So what used to be a 4-foot culvert is now a 40-foot bridge, and you have room for that debris, whether it's trees or whatever, ice jams, right, to pass through. And so the trees don't cause the flooding per se, right? But you know, they're falling into the river, and then yes, the undersized structure is the cause because they get plugged with whatever. They get plugged with ice often in the spring. So the way that we can sort of solve that, at least one way, is by upsizing those structures. Jason, Marie, agree?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a natural, the falling trees are a natural part of the system. If we let them sit there, we wouldn't have projects like Beaver Analogs and Woody's debris initiatives to put it back in.
Right.
So we want that in the streams, but we also need it to pass under our structures, so it doesn't.
Stuff we put in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, though, there are some really big piles of trees in some
There are,
places that towns are very much worried about. You know,
And so
if Lee or something comes through, it could take the bridge out.
Yeah, I've been actually wanting to talk to you about a couple of folks who've mentioned that come to my house. Can you see in the backyard? This humongous gravel pile is new. All those trees right in the middle are new. They're going downstream and plugging up that bridge in the next one. What do we do? And I want to be able to have a resource for that.
And it's kind of a cool point to Jason's point is that in many cases we can use those trees, right, in the projects. Like the project we're doing in Plymouth, we're installing trees, we're installing root wads in those new banks that we're creating in that new floodplain. So there's a pile of
The one at the
trees.
bottom of the lake
Yeah.
there, if you don't mind. Take
So
that away.
instead of pulling them out of the forest and paying someone to do a logging job, right, we can actually go buy those trees from someone that's looking to get rid of them.
Nice. Davis Road. Were there any questions on Zoom?
No, there was only one person on Zoom, Tracy, and she just did pass on a comment. She said, thanks very much for doing this session, very informative. And then she said homeowners with sloping land would benefit from small scale tips and ideas.
Good. Yeah, that was one other thing that if either of you have thoughts on.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there was a question on Zoom about smaller scale solutions for homeowners as opposed to, we're gonna do an entire riverbank. What about the person who's got a small stream in their backyard that wasn't a small stream on July 10th? Are there some good solutions for that sort of a scenario, and would that be a case-by-case basis? Should we talk about site visits?
The fabric is a fairly easy way. You can buy a roll of it, and you can install it essentially yourself, right?
And that's like the erosion control blanket that would then.
Yeah, exactly. Erosion control blankets, fairly simple, inexpensive. There's things like coir logs that are really good for shoreline stabilization because it's taking that energy of that water. Those are all good things to do for sure.
Great.
Well,
The other thing I would say, sorry, go ahead.
Well, going back to having the home landowners work together, so if one landowner is going to do that, how will that impact the others, would be the next question logically to ask.
Right. And does guidance come along with those items to be installed?
Yeah.
Would you guys come and like do the whole thing and?
I don't actually do the work, but I'll certainly show someone how to do it. But I think what Ron said earlier was a great point. Rock riprap is not the end all be all, right? In Maine, in my state in Maine, coastal wise, that was the thing to do forever. They had the 5 R's. It was rock, 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 and then retreat. Okay, if the rock didn't work. Now people are starting to realize that there are green options out there, soft armor options out there, bioengineering with root wads, and be amazed how many times I've helped homeowners with just going in the woods and cutting willow sticks and putting plugs in. It can be as simple as that.
And it's more effective in the long run, I think Melissa's getting to this and a couple of other folks, is if adjacent neighbors or across the stream neighbors kind of get together and, hey, you know, let's all do this sort of thing, then you don't have just this little patchwork of fixes. You've got a whole stream stretch that's being addressed with the same methods. Sorry,
Sure.
it's
I
a
mean,
die up
it's
here.
the community, right? Everybody's
Exactly.
gotta work together.
And who knows which neighbor's gonna see
If
that
you're just
one.
throwing rock riprap in there, to Ron's point earlier, you're just affecting what's happening downstream.
And sometimes what it takes for that is for one person to start.
Yep.
Right, for that one landowner to say, I'm gonna put the mat down and I'm gonna put some shrubs in here, and then your neighbors say, what the heck are you doing? And you say, I'm doing this because it's gonna benefit my property and it would benefit yours too. You know, so that kind of interpersonal communication is often what starts that to happen in the neighborhood.
Marie, that's an excellent point. When we're working with farms, we get a ton of projects because people see our crew all week out on the farm planting trees and digging holes, and they stop by and they either ask us or they ask the farmer, right? What the hell's going on? What are you doing? And they say, oh, they're planting trees along the brook and, you know, blah, blah, and they went, well, how much did that cost? Oh, nothing, you know, it's all grant funded. Well, how do I get in on that? We get projects all the time from referrals, right? Neighbors or people driving by, and the willow stakes, I mean, the live stakes, if you have willows on your property, or like my friend who's the farmer on the White River, he let us come in every year and cut willows because, again, they don't die, they just send out new shoots. So you can actually help your neighbor, or he helped organizations with letting us come in and cut those willows, and you just stick them in the ground, they will grow roots and sprout. They're phenomenal, and it doesn't cost anything.
I think I can give another example. I just went down in Newfane. There's a stretch between two bridges where I want to say maybe it's 1.5 miles or something. I don't know how many neighbors, like 10 households, maybe somewhat of a tight community, but they ended up starting a conversation about, you know, what they could do for resilience and how to plan for the next time. And so I just went out to do a site visit with them, and it was one main person who contacted me, but then he actually contacted all his neighbors and said, you know, can we come on your property? Kathy from CRC is coming out, and so like they're actively sort of talking together about what they might be able to do. And then his next step was to contact actually Evan Fitzgerald, which is one of the engineers we work with, a river engineer, to come and do the same thing. Visit all these sites and try to identify, really looking like not at one property owner, but along this whole stretch of river, like where is the opportunity to protect a house and or allow the river to flood out and lose some energy. And so collectively, you know, I'm waiting to have Evan go look and get his opinion. You know, I had my opinion look, I'm like, maybe this and this and this, but we'll see what Evan says. And then, so there's the opportunity then to have maybe multiple projects or phased approach, you know, where you can actually really think almost on a ecosystem level, like what are the choices here in this longer reach of a river that could collectively benefit everybody that lives along it. So, but I think, you know, maybe it's like a potluck and having your neighbors come over and have a conversation or something like
Sounds
that.
like a party, I'll be there.
Me too.
We'll invite you.
Did you have a question?
What about Japanese stop
knotweed, how's that doing? I mean, it grows like willows or
It's
alders
doing
or-
great.
Yeah.
One of those awesome
I mean, I'm
this
pulling it out of my yard.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it started its origin story on the slopes of Mount Fuji in Japan, and it's the first thing up after a volcano. So
Right, I mean, I'm pulling it out of my yard
Yeah.
now, but is it doing the job of slowing things
No,
down?
no.
No, so we'll do restoration projects sometimes where maybe we're putting in a riparian buffer planting and there could be knotweed, and so we treat the knotweed to get it out, and then you plant it, and you essentially need to try to get the plants that we're putting in to create a buffer to outcompete that knotweed. So you can knock it back, but yeah, it's an ongoing. I mean, that's just an
it's more
epic-
management than eradication.
It's the form of the plant that doesn't work as a
It's too
buffer.
skinny.
No,
Yeah.
number one, it's basically it dies back every winter, right? So it's not like a shrub where the stems are sticking up. Also, the roots are very thick and long. Instead of being a network like a tree or special ferns, that are really dense, fine roots that hold the soil together, knotweed has just long, thick runners that don't hold anything together.
Right.
And each time it breaks up, it will replant somewhere else. So, yeah, it is the antithesis of a good riparian plant.
Unfortunately, it's damn near everywhere and is like
Yeah.
the bane of our existence now. I joke it should be the Vermont state flower because, I mean, and people spend years trying to get rid of it on their property.
At work, our sumac has pushed the knotweed out.
Great.
All right.
Sumac's native, so
Sumac's good.
good.
Trees will come next.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for putting up with my reading of my notes. Appreciate you guys.